Hi, welcome to another edition of Elevate by Vyom, where we discuss everything robotics, drone, and everything happening in the deep tech space. Today we've got Karthik with us, who's the founder of Agam Robotics, and we've also got Aditya, who's the founder of Vyom. So let's get this test session started.
Hi,
Over to
Karthik.
you.
Welcome to Elevate.
Thank you. Thanks.
Karthik, we've been very impressed with you. We know of very few founders like you who have been building in the public and in the drone space, as it is even outside. It's very interesting. Can you just, start from the beginning? How did it all start? When did the idea of starting a company come to you? What is your origin story?
Okay. It wasn't something like, it clicked and it happened. It was more of uh, a decade, a 10-year-old planning. It was all like manifestation of over a period of time. So it was like back in 2013 when I did my first engineering project. We built like a VTOL aircraft, which is something like back then it wasn't a typical aircraft style which you commonly use it. It was mostly like quads at that time. Like we were building a VTOL aircraft and we kind of built the firmware side of it, very early version of that tilt rotor or tilt wing design. And that's when I found like a lot of the components we were using were all like from China, right? Like we were directly getting it. And my question was like, how do we design or like how do we do that here? Like how can I get into that stage? Like because I come from an electronics background, I had that curiosity. And that's where I was looking into more of that aspect. I was mostly like all the drones what I built has been only on the as a hobbyist side. So I kind of like looked into what is needed to be done. So that's where I got interested in the embedded systems and like electronics and PCBs and stuff like that. And that's where I got a job at Centum Electronics, where they kind of design and manufacture PCBs. And that was my kind of first job, and that's kind of gave me path to what we are building today. Most of it, like what we kind of do now, is all related to what I was doing at my first job. So after then, in parallel to that, I was building a lot of drones and stuff. But I always had that curiosity of like, how do we do this? And also like it required a lot of the not just the electronic side, but also like the firmware development and also like the mechanical parts for drones, right? Like the frames and like how do you aerodynamically design all that stuff. So kind of an idea of like rather than doing specific to one sector, an interdisciplinary course. So that's where I was interested into robotics, because like robotics is like interdisciplinary course of your electronics, firmware development, mechanical designs. So that's where I thought of doing that, and got admitted to masters at NYU. And 2 years I did my masters there, and I was building like a lot of projects and like a lot of different things. We also had like a course for entrepreneurship where we like built a product and we actually sold it in the market, and there was like a huge response to it, and that also like kind of gave me an idea of combining the robotics or like the building of products plus the entrepreneurship. And almost like 2019 is when I started working in the US as a robotics engineer. So that kind of also gave me some idea of like how the industrial sector works in terms of like the robotics or like the industrial automation side. And in parallel, that's where in 2020 is where I actually started what we see right now as Agam Robotics today was the inception of Agam Robotics in 2020. So when I was in US, because it was peak COVID time in 2020, we like I was alone there, and like I was building more into like all these FPV drones, and I was like carrying on this building drones as a hobbyist journey, even in the US. So I was like still doing that, and that's where I had this idea like let's start working towards that. Like rather than just building drones, let's look into all the parts and like let's start designing and getting it manufactured stuff. So that's where I kind of started with the flight controller, like autopilot system. And I was like specifically looking at all these autopilots what were there in the market back then. And I used to see that like a lot of these have issues with the CPU overload problems, meaning like all the sensors when you connect to the system, it always like using its full utilization, and you are not able to go further beyond that. And that's when I saw like the commonly used STM32 chip was pretty much there everywhere in the all the drones, but like they're not coming up with like better chips where we can actually utilize its capabilities. And because it was peak COVID and there were like all these, the entire shift was happening, right? The chip shortage, and a lot of these companies were, rather than focusing on consumer side, they were like focusing more on automobile and industrial side. So all these chips were being taken over by them. So we were like having that chip shortages and stuff like that. And that's where I found like this NXP had a better chip which has like more potential. And this was also being used by like some major drone companies, which are like leading drone companies like DJI. So that's where kind of contacted them in the community and then asked them. And they said like they're also working on something similar stuff. And we worked kind of together, and certain designs like we got manufactured in China when I was still in the US. So they were like bearing all that expenses from their side. And we got like first and the second iteration going on with that. There were like few problems we came up with, and then we changed certain designs, and we kind of finalized some of that design, and we were like, okay, this is kind of like working for us. So let's get into this part of the thing. And that was when it was 2022, and I thought of like, okay, this is the right time for me to come back to India, like rather than them getting it manufactured from China, let's do it in India, because as I said, like the entire journey of mine is through that. Right? Like I've been into the PCB industry, and I can kind of like understand that. I was like, okay, let's figure that out. And I came back to India. It took me some time. Like it almost took around 6 to 7 months to find the right manufacturers. And the first prototype from here was produced in 2023, end of 2023. And like there was some testing, and like we had some design issues there, like some of that from my side I had like some constraints and like some manufacturing issues. Kind of all that were sorted out by beginning of 2024. That's where we had like the initial prototypes, and that was all tested, and it was all like ready to be like used in any type of aircraft. So I kind of contacted some of the people, and by then like I was also building it public, right? Like I was already building some kind of user base and like traction. People were interested to test it, and there were like few companies who were also kind of interested to like use, because it was a made in India and it was quite unique, and there were like a lot of potential features which it had. So they said like, okay, we'll buy it and test it. So all the prototypes were sold in March, April of 2024. And that's when I was like, okay, let's start with like mass production, and try to kind of like scale it. Prototypes is one thing, but scaling is a totally different thing. Like that requires a whole level of other stuff. Almost like 2024 end, we were like trying to optimize on the manufacturing BOM and like all the not just the autopilot. So my focus was to make it as a full kit. So autopilot was done. So along with that, there were like all these power modules, cables, connectors, which is needed for integrating with other devices. So that's kind of like what I was focusing on. And then like beginning of this year is where like we kind of took a huge jump. Like I was just building it from my home until 2024 end. It was all like from my room. I was just doing all that mass production batches and assembling, testing, debugging. And then beginning of this year is where we decided, okay, let's move to a bigger setup and bigger space. And that's where we kind of are right now. And we're also focusing not just on the autopilot, trying to work on like a lot of other products.
I'll want to talk about your journey as a solo entrepreneur, at least in the beginning as well. But talking more about Agam, right? You're making these flight controllers, and you made some very interesting design decision. You mentioned that it is not STM32. The problem that you were going after was that chips were heating up when you put in too many sensors, right? So could you talk us through some of these design choices that you have made along your journey, and why did you make those choices?
Okay. Sure. Like it was all mostly like I was talking to a lot of people, and being a user myself, I kind of understood like a lot of the problems I was facing, and that also because I was in that community of people who are building drones. So I was all in constant discussion with them and like asking them like what are their usual problems, what they're seeing, and what is that they needed to be resolved. And also like I'm trying to understand like how that entire market, like we're just seeing that effect now, but like back in 2022 itself, a lot of companies were trying to shift to made in India products, but like there were like not many options for them. So that's where I thought this would be a good idea to get it manufactured, because a lot of people I saw were like suggesting to get it manufactured in China and we could sell it here and then like just manufacture the enclosures and just put the name like in Agam Robotics and we can just import it. But that was something lot my intention was. We wanted to make actual made in India, meaning like every manufacturing part has to go through within the Indian vendors. And on the technical side, like again the capabilities of that SM32 is something I have already seen for over a period of years of how it can do. And it was, as I said, like there are like a lot of these CPU overload issues and a lot of development, which wasn't happening from the SM32 side. They are not coming up with like better chips every year or like maybe at least couple of years or 2 to 3 years. So it has been like 5 6 years they never came with like good chip set for improving our hardware to that next level. So that's where I saw like the potential with NXP was it is like 3 times more powerful and it has like more processing capabilities, and at the same time like it also had this more number of pins, right? The SM32 was restricted with the number of pins where you cannot expand beyond certain number of ports. So this is where like we had that opportunity to work with NXP where we can actually add more number of ports. So you don't have to worry about like oh my, like how it is like with laptops nowadays, right? Like you just have one USB port, and then now you have to buy an expansion port to connect all your other devices. So you don't have to worry about all that. Like the ports, everything is like packed into the autopilot. So you don't have to worry about like expansion ports or like adding extra nodes or like adding the extra devices which will add extra weight and extra space and extra cost. So all that is sort of eliminated here. And you can see actually like our autopilot has like more number of ports than like any other autopilot in the market. And because it was from NXP side, we were able to do that. And another aspect I would say is like most of these connectors or the ports on the autopilot were all like on the top down, meaning like all the cables were plugged on top, and all your devices like whether it is GPS or like flow sensors or like any other BMS or any other devices has to be pulled down this way. So this is something like a lot of users had that issue where the connectors or wires gets cut or like easily get worn out. So that's where we thought like let's instead of doing the side connect like the top connectors, we should actually do it at the side. So that's why you see like in our autopilots like typically it's all on the sides here, and all sides have connectors. Like, literally there's like no space to like which is like kind of left empty or anything. It is like as far as possible, we were able to put every millimeter with like certain components and certain features and functionality. And because we wanted to keep the size to very similar to what is there in the market, there are like a lot of autopilots and flight controllers in the market. We just wanted to keep the same form factor so that it's more like a drop-in replacement and doesn't cause problems to our customers. So when they replace with the Chinese ones with like made in India ones, it should be more comfortable for them to replace it, and it shouldn't affect their entire drone real estate, where like they have to entirely reorganize and restructure the drone just because they are adding our part. It should be just like a same part drop-in replacement, and it shouldn't have any issues where like they have to rewire or redo everything from their drone side. That's kind of like the design choices that we were saying.
So customers are now getting a more powerful chip with more connection potentials. Any other benefits of your design choices versus somebody using an STM32 based
Yeah, like, we do have added a lot of things as well. Like there is a 100 Mbps Ethernet connection where like it gives you access to connect to your let's say AI development boards, like where you want to make your drone or like your vehicle. Like I'll come back with that part, like why I'm saying it vehicle instead of drones. Like if you want to make your AI part of your project or like your product, you can actually connect your AI development boards like NVIDIA Jetson or like Raspberry Pi or any development board through a two-port Ethernet connector, where you'll be able to directly get all your AI process done, and that will directly feed into the autopilot. So that all is like from the Ethernet side, it is all done on the autopilot carrier board. And along with that, there is also something called a secure element chip, where it actually kind of encrypts all the data which is being logged into the autopilot. Let's say you connect like multiple sensors and like GPS or like any other sensors. All that are actually encrypted and then sent to the autopilot. So in case someone actually spoofs, for example, there were like some cases where it happened in the border, where some other country were actually taking control of that drone, and they were able to completely hack the Indian drone. The reason why it happens is because it's all like open network and the autopilot is not encrypted. So they were able to spoof the GPS and confuse the autopilot that it is actually in the wrong place, and they made it go to the other side of the area. So that is something all can be eliminated with our autopilot, because there is an hardware encryption, not just the software encryption, where like some companies will say they have a secure firmware and things like that, which is something they are doing it on the firmware side. That is one thing. Firmware has to be there. But on the hardware, what is it that they are encrypting? So this is where the autopilot comes into picture, where we have a hardware chip which actually encrypts the entire hardware data itself. So any components you connect on these ports will be encrypted and sent to the autopilot. So there is actually a encrypted chip on the autopilot flight controller board, and there is also one on the carrier board. So there is two doing like two different jobs there. So it is actually completely encrypting the entire data what is going to the autopilot and from the autopilot.
Oh wow, interesting. So you get much more secure autopilot compared to what you would get otherwise. Very interesting. Yes. So how has your experience been? Well, being a component manufacturer in this drone ecosystem.
It is fascinating and interesting, and sometimes frustrating. It's a mixture of both, I would say. It's a good feeling though. Like we are able to serve a lot of companies who are doing like different projects, different type of, as I was saying, like different vehicles, right? The reason is because the autopilot is not just meant for UAVs or drones. So it can do like VTOLs, aircrafts, even like rover, like mobile robots, and then underwater vehicle. So there are like a lot of various type of vehicles you can choose from, and the hardware is quite common. And then you just have to select what devices you are going to do, or what kind of aircraft you are building, or what kind of vehicle you are going to set up, and then the autopilot will do its job based on that. So we are like not just talking to a lot of drone sectors itself. We are also trying to focus on these rovers or like autonomous guided vehicles like AGVs or like mobile robots or like underwater vehicle. Like we are trying to kind of cater to all that market as well. But like the major part is being mostly the drones and UAV sector, and it's been like pretty wild, I would say. Like again, most of them are like price sensitive, and they kind of compare it to Chinese alternatives in the market. So that's where we kind of clearly say like this is not as a replacement for you. This gives you more than that. It's like the processing capability wise, functionality and feature wise. And on top of that, the other part, what we also kind of focus is the service and support, which is something like you buy it from these other vendors, which are like not made in India, like non-Indian based autopilots. They don't kind of provide any supports as such. Right. Like you just buy it from either like a distributor who is actually distributing like a lot of different parts, and the manufacturer is something like thousands of miles away. Have like literally no contact, and the only way you have to rely is on the online platforms. Like post your queries or the issues what you have, or like discuss with the community, and you have to wait for someone to help you or like resolve that issue. That is something we kind of avoid. Like if our customers are buying our product and they have something, we are there to like help them out and setting it up, or like any issue they face, or providing services. Let's say like they had some issue with their hardware, we are providing all that services, and that is where that value add for that pricing is. We are not a direct drop-in replacement where we price this autopilot at the same price as Chinese and like say like okay, this is the pricing, you can go for it. No, we want to like actually build that ecosystem and the support and service which most of them are lacking in this market today.
Excellent. Excellent. Good. So, there is a push towards more Make in India and indigenization, which, well, how has your experience been with that? Have you had the benefit of that?
I don't see much of a benefit, but the pressure from the government saying like they can't use Chinese and like in the recent times like there has been a lot of push for they're like looking like previously they were just looking at the drone and like certifying it and they were not understanding like what is the parts inside or like where it is coming from. They were not like asking such questions, and that's why a lot of companies were able to bypass that and like just get these Chinese parts, white label it and tell that like it is made in India. And they were like selling it, but that is kind of being hard now. Like still, a lot of people are doing it. We see that happening every now and then in the market. But like a lot of companies are understanding it. They are kind of realizing that like they can't rely on these products in the market because anytime it can go out of stock or like there is like literally zero support or like if something happens they don't know what to do. We had like literally some of the companies keeping a box full of autopilots which they're like not working and they don't know how to repair it or service it, and like no one is doing that for them. Right, like it's just like a box full of just autopilots sitting there and not being like serviced or like it's just like it could be a few thousand repair. That's it. Like no one is understanding like what can be done because it's not their hardware. So that is what we kind of highlight. Like if you have that issue, like where we can actually solve it with like few thousand rupees, you should not actually replace the entire hardware. So you just have to replace that and you'll be good to go with the same autopilot and it will run for another few years. That will also reduce all your the environmental issues and like all these pile up of electronics and all the plastics and all these waste which are e-waste which are being like collected. So that is where we are kind of focusing on, and a lot of companies are trying to understand that, and they are coming forward and like most of the inquiries comes directly through the website for us. They say like we were looking for made in India or indigenous autopilots and we saw like you have it, so we are like interested to test it or like use it. So we kind of get that kind of a request. So it's all about mindset, I would say. Most companies are doing it. There are some companies who are trying to bypass and go with the non-indigenous and like Chinese parts. But like it is all coming to light immediately, right? Like we see it every now and then in the news saying like this company got their drone hacked, and when you look at it, like it is all Chinese parts. So like they can't hide it for very long. So they sooner or later they have to switch. I'm not saying like they have to switch only to us. There are like a few bunch of options out there in the Indian market where they're actually manufacturing it in India. So go with any of them. Is what we would say.
Yeah. And how has the supply chain experience been, and do you see it changing?
Yeah, it was like I still remember the initial prototypes. It was very hard to get it, and we were like paying almost like 2 to 3 times the price what we are currently paying. So it has definitely come down, I would say, and also we are focusing more on like larger quantities of manufacturing. So we are buying it in bulk, and some components based on the like availability. We are also like keeping up the stocks as well, like building up inventory. Supply chain has been okay, I would say, but still there are like a lot of longer lead times. I don't know, is it from like the importing side or is it on the manufacturing side? We see some of the components having like 15 weeks lead time, 20 weeks lead time for like even bulk orders. I'm not even saying like a few hundreds. Like I'm saying like thousands. Even if you buy it in thousands, they're still having a lead time of thousands, like 15, 20 weeks lead time. So it has been a mess. That is one, and second is like yeah, even the whole import process from the like from our government side has also been a bit messy. I would say it's not like easy to import and get things going. There is a lot of documentation, paperwork, banking stuff which you have to do. So all that simplifying for startups would be really a great help, I would say, because most of our time is spent on like all these documentation and paperwork to get the parts imported, And then there is like all these import duty which we are paying unnecessarily is like adding that extra cost. Like the parts are cheaper, and then like you are importing, and then that you're like paying shipping fees, importing fees, and then the shipper who is doing that process, you have to pay them the fees. So there is like three different additional fees which are adding up on top of the BOM cost, which is something. All these are like invisible costs, which like a lot of people don't actually see it. But when you add that into the BOM, that's where you realize it's actually substantial. So anything on simplifying that would be a great help in the market, but I guess it would take time for the government to do it, I guess.
Yeah, good. And so I wanted to come back to your unique style of building the company. You have a very active YouTube presence. You've been talking about your journey. You've been doing it alone practically. How has that been, and what do you recommend to other entrepreneurs?
Yeah, like my journey was kind of weird, I would say. Maybe as you have heard, like my entire journey, like you would have seen it. Like our focus mostly was doing the drone components. We were not into providing services, which I see a lot of companies who are providing drone components, and then they try to do services on the side, thinking like they can make some quick bucks from that, which actually eats a lot of your time and money or like effort which you are putting in. That's why we wanted to focus purely and solely on doing the drone components itself, and we wanted to make the complete ecosystem of all the drone components hardware. So it's not just the autopilots. We are also working on GPS sensors, and we are also working on different power modules and power electronics basically for different applications, and a lot of other components which we have in our pipeline in this year. So that is what we wanted to focus on, and kind of cater to the market where the people are actually who are building drones. They should be focusing building the drone application and not worry about the components. Like I see a lot of drone companies, like even big companies thinking since they're doing drones by themselves, if they start manufacturing the components, they'll be like saving cost. Actually, they are spending more money on that doing so, because their numbers are very less. They are let's say 20 drones is what they're doing. And if you try to build autopilots of like 20 to 30 numbers, it is going to cost you more, and you are actually spending more on that, and then you are not saving any money. So that is where we kind of tell like many companies, like you just focus on your application, leave the drone component development to us. We take care of that. You'll get the best price, which you will not even be getting if you try to do it everything by yourself. So a lot of companies don't understand that. Few companies realize and they're like, we understand, we don't want to get into components. This is what we need. Get us this, we are good. So they place order, they get it, they build the drones, they sell the drones. So that is something like, it's still a lot of companies are kind of yet to realize that, I would say. And that is what I've been seeing, and like throughout, since I started my YouTube journey and like building it in public. A lot of companies keep saying like, we want to build a flight controller. What would you recommend doing so and stuff like that? I'm like, if you're building a drone, like build a drone. Don't worry about like building the components. If you're building components, then just do the components part so that like you kind of understand that whole thing and then move on to other things. Don't do like multiple things at a time, trying to experiment or trying to do like multiple things at a time, which you will never be able to either finish that or this.
Very interesting. Great. So, and any predictions for the Indian drone market landscape?
Indian drone market is growing for sure. We are seeing like from 2021 when I was in US, where I was trying to do market research and like trying to look at like all these drone companies, and I was trying to contact them and see like what are their issues. And while I was designing, I was also doing the market research. I remember there were I think 300 plus startups, I guess, back then. So now it has grown like it's almost threefold or fourfold now. I guess it's almost like more than 3,000 startups across India. I would say it's growing, and also like a lot of new applications are coming up. Right, like a lot of people are thinking in different ways or unique ways to use drones for certain applications, and they're trying to solve different problem statements. It's not just restricted now to like 5 or 10 sectors. Right, like it's not just agriculture, inspection, mapping, survey. It's not just like logged into that. Like they're doing a lot of different things as well now. So that is something interesting. It is definitely growing, I would say. Uh, what I would recommend is recommend or like I really hope the market understands that we should not actually be relying too much outside because of all these things. Like not just on the drone sector, I'm saying like across all the other sectors. What has been happening in the last few months, if you see, self-reliance is like pretty much important. It's not just you're not just buying like Indian products. You're actually supporting and making that ecosystem be self reliable. So that we all grow together. It's not just the drone components, but also the drone manufacturers and people who are using the drones. All would be beneficial if we start helping out each other in the sector. And that is something like they had to realize that we had to continue using the Indian products and we had to continue supporting. Of course, we can't beat the pricing with what Chinese are doing. It has to be like a slow process, I would say. It will take time for kind of reducing that prices. We have to do a lot of things for that. So I hope that improves in the next few years. But definitely, I see the potential here. It will definitely grow for sure.
No, and it's, I think people like you will play a large part building for the entire ecosystem and not just one specific application. And you're building not replacements, but also building for the next generation of what these devices will look like.
Definitely, yeah. Well, it's not just for the drone components. It's more about let's say software people who are like developing software for drones and people who are building the drone hardware, and then someone who is building the drones itself, buying these parts.
That's
Which
right.
they're like, okay, let's not worry about building the manufacturing the drone. Let's buy the indigenous parts and then build from there. And then the users who are buying that made in India drones. Like now you don't see the Chinese drones in the market much, right? Like because that ban has clearly been effective. So nowhere the people are able to import like a full drone for a different application. But I would say there are like certain drones which are there in the market for a consumer level, which let's not look into that aspect. But as a enterprise drones, we don't actually see Chinese drones much in the market now. It's mostly like the indigenous parts and the contents are actually increasing. So it is all beneficial for that entire chain of people who are like using and working on it.
Perfect. It was great having you on our show, Karthik. Thank you
Yeah,
so much for your insights, and looking forward to working together in the ecosystem.
definitely. Yeah, it would be wonderful to see that.
Thank you.